Thank you for doing this today, Speaker McClinton, Madam Speaker. So let's start off the interview by just doing a quick introductory questions. So tell us a little about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and how you got involved in politics and got to the Speaker's office.
My name is Joanna McClinton. I'm from Southwest Philadelphia. I am currently the state representative to the neighborhood that raised me, and I just became Speaker of the Pennsylvania House 1 year ago. After 140 men, very thrilled to be the first woman to hold the gavel and to lead this institution. I got into politics in a non-traditional way. I went to law school after college, was a public defender for almost 10 years, loved standing up, fighting for people, but I started to realize that the whole justice system needed a little bit more help, perhaps from a different angle. Found myself fortunate enough to become my state senator's chief counsel, had no information about Harrisburg, the state capital, what happens in places like this, but I did know that the laws were made here and that there were so many laws like mandatory minimums that I was fighting in court that were not fair. So I came to this job hoping to be able to influence a criminal justice reform platform. 2 years into the job, my state representative retired, and my senator said to me right here in the Capitol one day at work, have you thought about this open seat in our neighborhood? Because he lives in the community too. You ever think about running? And I'm like, negative. I don't want to run for office. At that point, I'd been working here for 2 years and got a real feel for the thrill of public service. And I just thought, it's great to be behind the scenes, but I don't want to be at the forefront, and I definitely don't want to put my name and myself out there and, potentially be scrutinized, lose an election, any of those sorts of things. But I'm very fortunate that almost 9 years later that I did run in a special election in 2015.
Okay, and what is the significance of being the first woman speaker and being the second black speaker in Pennsylvania history, the House history, and also how does that impact the communities you represent or your communities in general for being a woman and for the black community?
So there is a saying that representation matters, and it does. There's so many times when we think of a position of power, we do not see women, and we definitely do not see women of color. So I'm very grateful to have broken through the barriers that to this point, prior to 2023, there had only been one person of color to serve as Speaker, Speaker K. Leroy Irvis, who was called the Lion from Pittsburgh back in the late 60s, early 70s. And it's been generations until there was a second African American to be Speaker and the first woman. It's very significant because in my neighborhood, my neighbors are thrilled. They are proud. They're like, you're the Speaker of the House and you're our state rep. That's pretty amazing. And they're telling me I made history, but I tell them, no, we made history, because without their support to even be their voice in Harrisburg, there would be no pathway to the speakership.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned about getting involved as a public defender, and how does that impact your view on politics, perspective in politics, even to this day? And how do you think that prepared you to get involved in politics?
I did not know this at the time, but becoming a public defender and spending almost a decade in that office at the Defender Association Philadelphia certainly paved the way for me to learn what my voice is, what my advocacy style is, and most importantly, how to negotiate with people who see situations very differently from me. I found very early in my legal career that I needed to make friends across the courtroom. It wasn't enough if a judge recognized me from a mixer when I was in law school, or if an ADA I remembered from a BOLSA event. I needed to stand up, assert myself, and let people know who I was, why I was there, and how we could work together, how I could be helpful to them and how they could be helpful to my client and I. And it's that type of opportunity that allows me and enables me, quite frankly, to be a strong leader here in Harrisburg, not only for my caucus, but proudly to represent the entire institution.
What's the day-to-day responsibilities like for being House Speaker? When we're talking about here in session in Harrisburg, but also say what are some things or responsibilities when we're not in session and maybe you're in Philadelphia or a different part of the state?
So day to day, being the Speaker of Pennsylvania's House, no days are the same. So many days are filled with lots of high priority meetings with major stakeholders, leaders of institutions who are seeking either support from the state or developing partnerships with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. When we're here in session, of course, I'm presiding over our voting sessions, taking roll call, making sure that every member is able to be heard on the floor of the House during debate. When we're not on the floor, I'm in this office having meetings sometimes with members and stakeholders, advocacy groups, constituents, children and seniors from across the district. And when I'm back in the district, I love to spend time with my constituents. I just got off of a pretty exciting 2-week read across the district tour, visiting a lot of different schools in my community. It's so very rewarding. I had a district event last week where we talked to our neighbors about how to save money on their utility bills. We had the utilities come out, the state agencies come out that provide assistance. So no day is the same. And then being speaker when I'm not in the district and I'm not in Harrisburg, I get to travel across the state and join my colleagues in events in every part of Pennsylvania. And that to me is very enlightening and eye-opening. I spent some time last weekend in Lancaster. The weekend before that, I was in Allegheny and Beaver counties, and there's just so much more work to be done.
Do you have any favorite moments from the past year being House Speaker? Is anything stand out in particular?
So I have most of what I say written down for me as a script, because the things that I need to say have to be, with our parliamentary procedures, with our House rules. I don't get to freestyle, but there are a couple of times on the floor that I remember the entire chamber, having some resounding laughter or catching our breath, gasping at moments. But it's been pretty exciting, and at times, you just cannot predict what's going to happen on the floor of the House. But there are moments when I'm very grateful that I can not only lead the chamber, but do it in a way that reminds everybody watching at home, this is a serious role. Just because some of my colleagues want to come here and create chaos and play games doesn't take away from the seriousness of this role.
So I want to move on to reproductive rights and how that has shaped the Democratic caucus in the past year. So in 2022, Republicans pushed a constitutional ban constitutional ban on abortion. How has that impacted the caucus, in the Democratic caucus? Let's walk through that from when they introduced that in June of last year, or a couple of years ago, actually. Sorry, time's getting missed. But when they introduced that, and how that became a campaign issue, and how Democrats took the House.
In 2022, I was first deeply disturbed when the leak of the Dobbs draft opinion came out to the public. And I just was a part of so many different organizations, rallies, public demonstrations that, the Supreme Court of the United States should not roll back anyone's rights, but especially women. And then I was just astonished and really, really disturbed and defeated when almost 50 years of a right that my grandmother, that my mother enjoyed was not going to be available for my goddaughters. It's sickening, it's outrageous, because this is healthcare, and reproductive freedom and rights is all about us having our own independence and autonomy. And regardless of our faith, of our personal beliefs, the government is not entitled to take away anyone's rights. So as a woman, and at the time as the first woman to be a leader in the House, I was able to really join in with my colleagues and let people know that it's outrageous, it's wrong. But then after the June decision in July, on a Friday night, House Republicans, who were in charge at the time, decided it was a good idea to push a constitutional abortion ban. And that to me was just not acceptable. So I took it to the social media platforms and make sure that people who normally were not tuned in on a Friday night, should turn in the session to see what was happening. They were not allowing us to give our speeches. They were not allowing any amendments. And we let people know outside the building too. And there is no surprise that November, although slim, that Pennsylvania voters in 102 districts elected Democrats to take control of of this chamber and to make sure that everybody's rights are protected.
How are reproductive rights being protected here in Pennsylvania with Democrats in charge of the chamber? What are the positive aspects of that?
So since Pennsylvania House Democrats, with our 1-seat majority, have taken charge of the chamber, we are, of course, a firewall to every sort of restrictive, bad, right-wing, radical Republican idea that will come through the Pennsylvania Senate. But in addition to being a firewall, the Senate knowing that they can't send an abortion ban to this chamber because it's dead upon arrival, we also have shown our leadership by stepping up, making sure that there is no infringement. We have had a public policy hearing on women's rights, on reproductive health care. We in our Judiciary Committee had a public hearing to talk about what does a constitutional amendment look like in Pennsylvania to defend a woman's right to choose. That bill is in the Judiciary Committee. We hope that it will come out of committee this year. We also, on the 51st anniversary of Roe v. Wade, had a package of bills introduced to make sure that all of the restrictions that allow people to unfortunately taunt women who are seeking health care at providers, that those restrictions would go away, that people would be able to have more access, not less access. We also have created the Pennsylvania Black Maternal Health Caucus, because when you talk about maternal health, that includes reproductive rights, that include an access to abortion care, because we can never play doctor. We can never tell people what rights they should have access to and which rights they should not. So we have done a Herculean amount of effort in just 1 year in our leadership roles to make sure that the public knows we're on their side and we're defending not just a woman's right to choose, but every single right.
What does it say about Pennsylvania voters over the past couple of years when it comes to protecting reproductive rights or pushing back against other issues that have come up, book bans and stuff like that? When we saw the governor's race in 2022 go to Governor Shapiro, we saw the House flip, and then we saw the Supreme Court race be impacted by reproductive rights. What does it say about Pennsylvania voters rejecting that and going forward into another important election year?
So make no mistake about it, Pennsylvania is indeed a purple state. It's not a blue state, it's not a red state, and for many, many years, we never had Democratic governors back-to-back succeed each other. But Governor Shapiro in 2022, of course, turned the page on that old history and changed the trend where we went from a Democratic governor in Tom Wolf to a Democratic governor in Josh Shapiro. Then in 2023, at the very bottom of the ballot, there were great people running for school board in a time and hour where unfortunately so many are trying to take away opportunities for our children to learn, trying to say, well, this book isn't appropriate, which is just absurd. And we saw so many school boards go from red to blue. And at the same time, at the top of the ticket, we saw once again Pennsylvania voters decide that we didn't want anything radical or right wing, and a Democratic justice was elected to the Supreme Court. So we have seen voters in Pennsylvania make up our own mind, not be dictated to by any entity or any outside group or even television ads. But we're informed, we're going to the polls, and we're standing up for what we fundamentally believe is right. Pennsylvania is the birthplace of our nation. All of our rights should be recognized. We should be having more rights, not less rights in this time.
How did the new maps impact that and your role with, would you mind just going over that, new maps with 2022 and the role you played with that?
In my one term as leader here in Pennsylvania's House, I served as the leader of the Democratic Caucus. It was a proud moment for me, unexpected prior to that, but truly thrilled to be the leader for our caucus, to be the first woman to do that work. It happened to coincide with a moment in redistricting, which happens every 10 years. So for my caucus, I was the first woman and the first person of color to be on the Pennsylvania Redistricting Commission. And my role in that was to make sure that the product that we came out with was a map that was simply fair and free For too many generations, we had maps that favored only one party, not the other, which is how, when I came in 2015, there were only 82 Democrats to 121 Republicans, although Governor Tom Wolf had just resoundingly won the year prior. It's like we saw statewide races go one way or another, but quite simply, our state house makeup was just so staggeringly different. So it was an honor to stand up and make sure that we had free maps, fair maps, maps that did not favor one party, not even my party, maps that are just competitive, maps that don't provide one party a competitive edge, and maps that are more representative. Because of the fair map that was created in our redistricting commission, we saw more representation than ever. I'm so proud as the speaker to have the most diverse Pennsylvania House of Representatives than we've ever had. We've got the first woman from northwestern Pennsylvania. We have several people of color from other parts of Pennsylvania, including the first Dominican woman ever elected to the General Assembly. We see maps and districts now that are representative of where people live and who the voters are.
Okay, and then I want to move on to public education funding. So what role does the legislature play in funding public education here in Pennsylvania, and how has it impacted year to year? Pennsylvania's public schools are funded by the tax dollars that are appropriated from this state capital. We are very different from some. We put a big weight on local school districts where they have to keep going to the taxpayers to try to get more funding because, unfortunately, for many years, the state legislature did not fairly fund schools. Our Commonwealth Court, after almost a 10-year lawsuit, made that decision in 2023. The Republicans in the House and in the Senate had the opportunity to appeal the decision. They did not appeal the decision because the court told us what we already knew, which is we've got to do a way much better job in fairly funding public schools. And that being said, we have an opportunity with this 2024 budget to start chipping away in a meaningful way against what we owe school districts. We have school districts in rural communities as well as in urban communities where they are not getting their fair share based off of how many students there are, what the population looks like, how many English language learners there are, how many students with special needs there are. So it's our job, and particularly in my caucus, to stand up and make sure that our dollars go through the fair funding formula and get to the districts who need it so that they in turn can give the taxpayers the break that they deserve. You mentioned something about public education funding being a rural and urban issue. How do you get that message across to colleagues from, say, more conservative parts of the state, rural parts of the state, that think it's just a urban issue, that money's going to Philadelphia or the other school districts? Like, how do you convey that message to those residents or those community members?
Well, one of the first and easiest ways to show my colleagues across the aisle that this is a common need is by looking at the age of the school buildings. School buildings in my community that are 50, 60, almost 100 years old are very similar to district buildings in other areas. And those school leaders either physically come to this Capitol or get onto virtual platforms to tell us that they need help in just repairing infrastructure. So I was proud in our last budget to, for the first time, delve out money for infrastructure, for aging buildings. And it is not just an urban issue or just a rural issue. It is an issue everywhere. We've seen tax bases dwindle and local school boards do not have enough support to pay the bills, quite frankly. And what ends up happening is some of our children are provided great free public education, and many other children are just left to say good luck, best wishes to you in your future. And as a former public defender, I recognize that not having a good public education can easily lead you down the pipeline to prison, which is not the way we want any of our youngest constituents to go. We have to give them the support they need to give them the stability and the hope for the opportunities in the future.
Okay, and one of the things that's always an ongoing fight in the Capitol is, or within Pennsylvania politics in general, is the push for Republicans to push for vouchers in response to education funding increases, or pretty much or anything in general. How do you get past politically when you have a party that just lobbies or advocates for that one issue, regardless of other things that are happening in the state?
Well, I think that it's very important for all of my colleagues to recognize that certainly parents in Pennsylvania already have school choice. We have robust programs under EITC and OSTC that provide scholarships through tax cuts to corporations, to students and families across Pennsylvania. So the idea of adding a new school choice program is just very challenging when we have been told we're not constitutionally obliged to students in public schools. We have a constitutional obligation to provide public school students a thorough and efficient education. That is the words, not from me, but from our Constitution. So until we do that, we cannot seriously debate or even discuss new school choice programs. We have to be very serious about the mass amount of our children. Most of them are in a public school in their community.
So what are the challenges of being Speaker here with a one-seat majority?
Being the Speaker of Pennsylvania's House with a one-seat majority presents no challenges at all. Just kidding. There are lots of challenges every day, and it varies depending on what we're voting on, what issues we're debating, what we're tackling. We have a beautiful diversity in our members, not only with gender and race and things of that nature, but also of where they serve. We have members who proudly serve communities with constituents that are very different from mine, where the needs are very different from mine, and the priorities are very different from mine. So my goal every day is to lead in a way that all voices are heard and that the issues that we are working on end up with lots of bipartisan support. And sending 260 bills over to the Pennsylvania Senate and 90% of them being bipartisan, already sending more Republican bills over to the Senate than the House Republican caucus, when they were in the majority, did for our caucus the term prior, makes me proud to show that we are working and we are productive no matter how great the challenges are.
You just mentioned how many bills were going over to the Senate. What priorities would you like to see to come out of the Senate that the House might have passed, say, last year at this point, when it comes to LGBT protections or gun safety bills or raising minimum wage? Like, what priorities would you like to see the Pennsylvania Senate possibly take up by the end of this year?
So the good news is we will be in session until the end of November. So there is plenty of time for the Senate to look at our bipartisan bills and decide that it is time for them to send them back over here for concurrence so we can get them to Governor Shapiro's desk. And of course, the first one is raising the minimum wage. Pennsylvania's minimum wage is embarrassingly low, $7.25. No state around us has it. Ohio, West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, New York, New Jersey. None of the states have a minimum wage as low as ours. So it is time for the Senate to send that bill over to the House so we can get it to the governor's desk. We sent them a great proposal, which will get Pennsylvania to $15 an hour very soon. There's other priorities that the Senate should send over. It's sad that it's still legal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to discriminate against someone based on who they love or how they choose to show up in our world. That's completely unacceptable. The Fairness Act needs to come back over to the House. It's even sadder that someone can lose a job opportunity because of how they style their hair or how it grows out of their head. So the Crown Act needs to come back over from the Senate. And we recognize that it is very, very important in this hour that the Senate continues to work with us and see which bills have bipartisan support. Public safety had bipartisan support. We sent 2 gun bills over that'll keep our community safer. One is a red flag law that would, if anybody has a breakdown or some sort of emotional health challenges, would temporarily disarm them to save their lives and the lives of their community members. That bill needs to come back. The other gun bill is the gun show loophole, where you get background checks on everything except a firearm with a long gun. That's unacceptable and it needs to come back. So we look forward to seeing what the Senate can get contingency of their voters upon. Certainly they have dozens, 22 Democrats in the Senate who are eagerly awaiting the opportunity to vote for these, and one bill that already passed the Senate, and it's so sad that it hasn't come out yet, but I'm holding on hope, is the one to provide justice for victims of childhood sexual assault. That's a bill that passed in the Senate multiple times, so we eagerly await a vote to be taken up on that bill.
And since you mentioned that, let's talk about the constitutional amendment real quick. What does it say for Republicans to package that with voter suppression bills or voter stuff to undermine the elections?
So it says that it's not serious. When Republicans are serious, they will have their staffs pick up the phone or walk over here or vice versa, call us directly, and we'll come over to meet with them. We know there has to be consensus. We are not in any way unaware of the fact that we only have a 1-seat majority. But there are some things that the Senate has sent that we just know that there is no possibility for it to see daylight, and packaging justice for childhood victims with one of the most restrictive voter identification bills in the country is unacceptable. We will not support any form of voter suppression. We want to make it easier for people to vote, not harder.